Our next guest is Beverly Longid, and she was, amongst many, on the COP26. So she will give us some feedback on the results and challenges of the COP26. Beverly Longid is from the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, and she's calling us from the Philippines. Welcome, Beverly.
Hello, good morning, good evening to all of our friends who are with us here today. So I'd like to share my reflection on COP26. I have two words. The first will be disenchanting, and the second is it was also encouraging. So I think after 2 weeks of discussions and negotiations in Glasgow, really there were no clear commitments and concrete solutions to the climate emergency. There was a failure of commitment since 2015, and I think implementing the Paris Agreement is slow, very slow, if not nil. Despite the backing of science on the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to limit global warming to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, it is still, unfortunately, very sad, it is still business as usual for multinational and transnational corporations. Large-scale mining, agricultural, and livestock businesses continue to expand, and there is no stop to dams and coal. In fact, there were more commitments. There was no commitment to stop the use of coal energy. It is my understanding that COP26 pledged again its broken promise 12 years ago of $100 billion per year to help poor developing countries to adapt to climate change and mitigate further rises in temperature. And this is quite contrary to wealthy Western NATO countries that increased their war budgets by $200 billion annually since the 2015 Paris Agreement. So it would appear that the war chest is bigger and overflowing compared to budget and expenditures for environment, health, and public entitlements. Granting that the parties keep up with their pledges, there is no clear-cut agreement on how to use these funds. Thus, there is still a great danger that these funds shall be used to further fund false and repressive solutions to climate change. Basically, there was much talk in creating carbon sinks or carbon offsets through reforestation programs, but these are all aggressively sold in the name of nature, community, or biodiversity conservation. There was less talk on loss and damages to life, health, and property, and even to ways of life, and lesser talk on the historical debt of developed nations to peoples and nations ravaged from the time of colonization. Lest we forget that it was colonization that also brought fatal diseases that nearly wiped out First Nation settlements in the Americas and in other colonies that were established in different parts of the world. And this continues with modern day deforestation and even with so-called reforestation programs. I think our previous speaker has mentioned that there's really an increased evidence on the source of COVID-19 being directly linked with the unnatural release of pathogens due to the destruction of the forest. In terms of protection on environmental defenders and activists, I think there needs to give this more attention and to increase the profile of this issue alongside the issue of environment and climate issues. There should be a stronger need to call for legal protection for environmental defenders and activists. So who's to blame for all of this? Who's to blame for the issue of climate change? Where does the buck end? I think at the end, at the root of the climate change, the climate emergency, is the greed of capitalist countries for profit. And when we speak of profit, we speak of gigantic profit, and this drives the causes of climate change. It is also profit that drives imperialist countries to launch wars of aggression and occupation. So I do agree, no, with the youth of today when they describe COP26 as in previous conference of parties, that it was all blah, blah, blah. So is there hope? I mean, despite all of these challenges and disappointments that we saw, is there hope? Definitely there's hope. In the Global Climate March or Global Climate Strike last November 6, an estimated 100,000 people out of the expected 10,000 protesters or marchers walked through the streets of Glasgow. No, we braved the biting cold, the wind and the rain, and hundreds of thousands more also march in different parts of the world, especially in the global south, no, defying COVID lockdowns and repressive measures. In the 2 weeks of COP26, there were daily protests inside and outside the official spaces, and culminated with civil society, mass organizations, and social movements walking out in the last day of COP26, calling it a mere performance. There could have been more. There could have been more of us in Glasgow, but with the costs and restrictions to attend the conference, many of us could not attend. Of course, we would see that there were more corporate lobbyists compared to people and communities in the front lines to be able to attend and speak out in relation to the climate change. Well, it was inspiring. I mean, for me, and I think for everybody who was there, to see in all of these activities, the protests, the actions, the events, not the usual faces in these climate negotiations, but the youth of today. They were there in their numbers, in their creativity and energy, and in fact, they led several marches before and after the global climate strike. So it is encouraging and inspiring that behind these historic marches and protests in Glasgow are peoples and communities who continuously defend the remaining forests and biodiversity of the world. I think one of the major takeaways for me in COP26 is that the fate of the planet does not lie with the empty talk and rhetoric of world leaders and corporate CEOs. It is with the collective and purposeful will of people who shall not wait for another catastrophe. We also rejoice with liberation movements that continue to fight the plunder of transnational and multinational corporations. So what can we do? Last 2 minutes, what can we do? I think one, we should provide bigger support directly to indigenous peoples and local communities who are in the front lines of struggles to combat climate change, more than to big international so-called conservation NGOs who might not have as a matter of principle human rights or people's rights. Two, effort should be given to enhance sustainable indigenous and local practices. This starts with the recognition of the existence of indigenous peoples and our rights to land and self-determination. I heard the earlier speakers speak about anthropocentric approach, and I think when it comes to indigenous peoples would look at the issue from also a different perspective, something more comprehensive, something more interrelated, wherein people are not separated from the environment. Three, there is still a big gap in translating the language of climate negotiations away from technical jargons. Issues of state neglect, social services, especially health, should be part of the discourse. And fourth, climate finance should be discussed under the lens of people's rights and people-centered development. Here, I think that the issue of development cooperation, inclusive partnerships, and international solidarity play a vital role. So let's work together to end this rotten, unequal, unjust, and oppressive system that is imperialism, the root of climate destruction. Let's continue and work together to educate, organize, and mobilize for system change. So those are a few of my takeaways, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my insights. Thank you, and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Beverly Longid. Thank you for sharing the experience at COP26 and your conclusions. I get one remark, or rather one question here, particularly for you. Do you have suggestions on how social movement can come more together and form a critical mass to change the high-level policies? You said we have to be together, but can you suggest how we can do that?
We have started just specifically for COP26, especially for people in the Global South. Hello?
Yes, I hear you.
We have started this coalition for people in the Global South to be able to participate in COP26 and in the climate debate. And we are organizing this, well, mainly now we are doing it online because of the restrictions of COVID, but hopefully we'll be able to do something face-to-face sometime next year to be able to come out with something more strategic, because definitely, I mean, it's the 26th COP already. And the prospects are not so dim as far as the conference of parties are concerned. So definitely we have to move away from that and do more of having people's actions on the ground through a coordinative and globally addressed actions, and what you call this, even including a campaign and education and information activities in relation to climate change.
Can these campaigns be held worldwide, or do they have to be separately for youth and indigenous people and separately for the West? How can we combine these campaigns?
Oh, well, of course, we can still continue with what we do as members of a group or as in countries, but definitely we can do it globally, worldwide, as we have done in several occasions. I mean, the Global Climate March was coordinated globally, but implemented also locally. So we can also, we can do that. And in several actions, in several issues, we have also seen such people coming together from different parts of the world in different time zones to be able to come out with a coordinated, and how you said, what they call this, coordinated and unified action against certain issues. We have done this in relation to international financial institutions. We have done this in relation to what do you call this, the general agreements on tariffs and trade. And that reminds me, the World Trade Organization ministerial meeting is upcoming, and there's still, again, another continuing action as from COP26. But I think we will have to stress that everything has to be done also linked together. I mean, we cannot do it as we used to do it before, as working in silos, but now we have to put ourselves together and link all of our efforts. Otherwise, nothing much can be achieved in the next few years.
Okay, thank you very much, Beverly Longid from the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation. We hear from you this afternoon again. I will invite everybody who's attending for a lunch break. What is interesting is that this will be for nearly 1 hour, but we will show on the screen quite a few interesting links on videos. You should really watch different reports, different things we have to share with you, the public who is interested in communicating on climate justice and health equity. There's also a note that says polls. So the Q&A you already found, but there's also a note that says polls. And on that poll, you can also click and give a comment on how you think the conference was going till now. We're interested to hear your comments. So bon appétit, enjoy your meal, and see you back in about 50 minutes, 50 odd minutes. And meanwhile, you can watch these videos.